Hello and welcome to the Tennessee Informer. I'm your host, Dave Vance. Tonight our guest is Richard Archie, West Tennessee Director of the Tennessee Firearms Association. But first it's time for announcements and updates. The Stewart and Henry chapter of the TFA will meet Thursday, September 7th, 7 p.m. at the Holly Fork Shooting Complex located at 6133 Highway 79 in Paris, Tennessee. Our speaker will be House District 74 State Representative Jay Reedy. Non-members are welcome to attend. The Tennessee Firearms Association annual fundraiser is September 9th in Lebanon, Tennessee at the Wilson County Fairgrounds. The keynote speaker is Donald Trump Jr. Go to TennesseeFirearms.com and click on annual event to purchase your tickets. You better get them fast because they are running out. You do not have to be a member to attend. The Stewart County GOP will hold a first ever Founders Day event Saturday, September 30th from 11 to 1:30. Our keynote speaker will be Lieutenant Colonel retired Dewey Browder, a Vietnam veteran and emeritus professor at APSU, where he was also a member of the inaugural class of the APSU Military Hall of Fame. He is also the president of the local chapter of the Sons of American Revolution. Also, a door prize, you will have the opportunity to win a door prize of 800 pounds of beef donated by a local cattleman. That's on the hoof, by the way. You'll have to get it processed. Tickets are $20 per plate and $35 per couple. Call 931-237-1026 for more information or leave a text. For good conservative talk radio, tune in to 105.3 WDXC radio in Lawrenceburg from 5 to 6 p.m. on Mondays for the Kip Capley Show and Wednesdays from 5 to 6 p.m. for the local GOP radio show hosted by the chair of the Lawrence County GOP, Brandon Taylor, and Lawrence Sutton, the secretary of the Lawrence County GOP. Also, of those of you who are tired and fed up with the overreach of federal government, don't forget to visit the website at the Tennessee Citizens for State Sovereignty. That's tncssweebly.com. Now to our guest, Richard Archie. Richard, thanks for joining us. The special session, which we had hoped wouldn't happen, hoped would be adjourned right away, and hoped would be over with by now, is still going. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, we didn't need a special session for any reason whatsoever, as far as I'm concerned, because we're sitting here 120 days away from getting ready to start the regular session, and I don't think that there's anything that's been brought up or anything that could have been brought up that's going to make a difference in school safety, which is what I thought the special session was supposed to be about. And so the problem that I have with the special session across the board is that you and I, as the folks who are supposed to be in charge of government, don't have an opportunity to be invested and involved with this because things are happening so fast that we don't have a chance to actually see the bills or to have conversations with the legislators that are bringing them and to be versed with possible amendments or the amendments that are being filed. And so to me, it simply subverts the intent of the legislative process in Tennessee, where it's our job to instruct our representatives. And right now, what we're trying to do is to play catch up and find out what's going on. And so across the board, I don't think this is a good idea. A special session is supposed to be about one issue. If you remember, the last time we had one, it was about going ahead and getting funding for Ford, right?
Giving money away.
Yeah, well, but what they did was they had a specific call, and then they dealt with that issue and they went home. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I heard them talking the other day in the floor session that it was costing somewhere in the neighborhood of $58,000 per day to hold this special session. That does not include the security that's going on. They're saying that's coming out directly from the Department of Safety's budget, but by the same token, that money's being spent. And instead of those individuals out here on the road keeping us safe, which is what they're supposed to be doing, because the Tennessee Highway Patrol is supposed to patrol the highways of Tennessee. And what they're doing is they're standing up there and they're having to enforce decorum in our house. And by the way, that's getting more and more difficult to do because they had to clear the gallery out today when the House had their floor session. And so across the board, I don't think that this has been helpful by any stretch of the imagination at all. I think that across the board, what it's done is cause harm to the conservatives of this state. And so for those reasons, I was opposed to it to begin with. And I think that what we're finding out is that we were correct in our denunciation of what we expected this to be, because it's turned out to be exactly that.
Now, one thing that at least I was wrong about, and I'm glad I was wrong, is I really expected, Antifa and other groups like that to show up, and I expected the kind of things that we saw happen in 2020 happening here. I'm glad that didn't happen. But that doesn't mean there was any shortage of lefties up there in the legislature, that's for sure. You had the commie mommies from all over the country descend on Nashville, and they were all throughout the legislature. And just to clarify, a lot of those people, some of those people were from here, but a lot of them from other places, and it was obvious that they had an agenda other than just making our schools safer. It was pretty obvious to me. I was up there Tuesday with you and then part of Wednesday. These people are just totally anti-gun, just totally anti-gun. And so really concerned that they were allowed in and not being from Tennessee. And I was also surprised, and I wonder what your thoughts are, the sheer number of bills that they tried to put through in just a week's time. That goes back to what you said a minute ago about not having time. Part of that was because they put so many bills through.
Well, that's true. When you're looking at 107, I think was the final end just on bills, and not including resolutions and honorings and things like that. Characteristically in a committee meeting that we would go to during regular session, they might get through 4 or 5 bills in a day until you get to the very end. And what they'll do, because they're behind, they'll try to run 75 in one day, and they'll kill most of those. But to actually consider bills and to have debate on them in committees is extremely difficult to run through in an hour and a half, which is what they traditionally have for a time period. And so you're seeing them going 2 and 3 hours to get through maybe 4 bills. And they're not debating these issues. What they're doing is they're getting a lot of preaching by other people. I was particularly upset with the chairman of the education committee the other day in the way that he did not keep control of that. And what we wound up with was a bunch of speechifying by a certain group of individuals, and then continued to talk about, what we've got to do is take away guns to have people be safe in schools. Yeah. And that's absolutely not the truth. It is an axiom that we all need to understand that it simply takes a good guy with a gun to stop a bad guy with a gun. And let's go back and talk about the Covenant shooting situation. It took 14 minutes from the time that police were notified to get in there to stop that person from doing the deeds that they were intent on. They intended to kill themselves. It was suicide by cop. Right. But the whole point of it is they wanted to be sure that they took out as many children as they possibly could for the notoriety. You see, the cap turned backwards on the individual to make themselves what they were doing were honoring this Klebo guy that had shot a bunch of people in the school before. It just absolutely astounds me to think that they don't realize that the way you're going to be able to provide protection in schools is to harden those things, to make it extremely difficult, if not impossible, for a bad person to come in with ill intent, and then to have people on the inside that can withstand the use of force by that person if they're able to gain entrance. And so why would you not think that it would be necessary to harden these schools so that you can't get in, and then to provide armed security on the inside? But a number of bills were brought forward for that, and the left has just absolutely lost their mind when you see them talking about, no, we don't need more guns in school. Guns are bad. Guns, and Chris Todd spoke to this in the bill that he was running.
Right.
He said that guns are inanimate objects, that they don't jump up off the table and shoot somebody of their own volition. Any more so, and they got all over him for this, but any more so than a car running over somebody couldn't do that by itself. And I guess one of Telsa's cars could do that if you programmed it, but we haven't come to that point yet. Right. And so characteristic of what we've seen when people want to do harm with a vehicle is somebody behind the wheel with evil and criminal intent. And so therefore, if you've got those folks that somehow gain entrance to a school, you need to be able to stop them. And it takes a force multiplier to do that. And so what we saw in the Covenant shooting, just like in any other, these people don't kill themselves or don't stop what they're doing until law enforcement shows up with a gun to match force for force. Yep. And so when we had different bills coming forward to try to say this is what we need to do, what you had was the Democrats and the left were just absolutely vociferous against their application. Oh, no, we can't have more guns because guns are evil. And it's just, they haven't studied the history of the United States. They don't understand what your unalienable and indefeasible rights are when it comes to being able to provide protection for yourself. Scalia said it best, I think, in Heller when he quoted St. George Tucker. He said that self-defense is the true palladium of liberty. And in any country where the government tries to take away firearms from its citizens, if liberty is not already lost, it's in dire jeopardy. These are things that we have known since the founding of this nation. The Second Amendment pre-existed, and we have 3 different Supreme Court cases that say it. It has been the human person's right in the United States to be able to provide self-defense, because you can't count on government because they've got qualified immunity. They're not responsible. Think about this. If a person dies in a car wreck on the highway, we can't sue the Department of Safety because they didn't make the road safe. If a person is killed in an armed robbery, we can't sue the police department because they didn't keep us safe. You have to understand that law enforcement and government has qualified immunity, which keeps them from being responsible. So therefore, it is imperative that each of us understand that self-defense is just that. We have to provide it for ourselves.
And we have to be allowed to, or we have to ignore laws that prevent us from defending ourselves. You know, before the special session, at the end of the regular session, the legislature provided for SROs in every school, and they provided other funding to make the schools a harder target. And yet we still had a special session to do that. And like you said, it's pretty obvious that most of these people are very anti-gun. I got the impression, because I was up there as well on Tuesday and part of Wednesday, that some of the witnesses called from the other side, they really were not that wild about the fact that the schools now had the ability to have an armed SRO in them. They're like, well, that's more guns. They didn't feel like that was a good thing. At least some of them, not all of them, but at least a good chunk of them felt that way.
I will give you a for instance of that mindset. I was at a TFA meeting in Nashville, and as we were coming in, there were a couple of people, and you have to understand that under Tennessee law, if you have an enhanced carry permit, what they call it now, used to be just a handgun carry permit, you can carry open or concealed. And so there were a couple of guys that came in, and they had their weapons not concealed. And there was a person standing at the check-in place as we were getting ready to go in. He said, "Oh my God, you've got to call the police. These people are wearing guns." And the manager of the store said, "But if I call police, there's just going to be more guns." And you could see the light in that guy's eyes go, "What? Wait, but," and then he had to think about it. And then he turned muttering and walked away, but it's a true statement. You have in Tennessee a right, if you are in fact not a felon, we have a shall issue permit system here. What gets me about what we saw last week, Chris Todd was carrying a bill, and what he wanted to do was to allow retired military, retired law enforcement, or people who have concealed carry permit or enhanced carry permits to be able to carry a firearm in a school.
Yep.
And these people just lost their minds about this. In fact, there was a bill that went forward before that said retired law enforcement and retired military could be SROs if they had SRO training. And there were a number of people that voted for that bill. And when Chris brought his up, now keep in mind that the General Assembly has said that those of us who have the enhanced carry permit can carry those firearms in Walmart.
Right.
We can carry them in church. We can carry them in the parks in the state of Tennessee. We can carry them just about everywhere except for what they call sensitive places or where they've got a no guns allowed sign. But we walk amongst the people with the training that we have received that was brought forth by the Department of Safety. They created the curriculum that said this is what you have to do, and these are the skills that you have to be able to show, and you have to be able to fire that weapon and show that you're familiar with it. And so they got a full 8 hours of training that you have to pass the test and all this kind of stuff. But now that they've taken our money, they don't trust us to carry firearms. And you saw that because the Department of Safety came up like they always do and testified against Chris Todd's bill. Now, what got me, and this I am still very upset about, there was an individual who had told him he was going to vote for that bill.
A Republican.
And then when it got into it, he turned and didn't vote for it, and we wound up with the 9-9 tie. And so what we had 5 Republicans that voted against that bill in that committee. 5. And so what we did was we handed to Justin Jones and that group an absolute win, because at the end of that, when that bill went down, then what you saw was Justin Jones raise his hands to the sky, and from the crowd, you heard all this clapping and going on, and it looked like a big win for the left and a defeat for Chris Todd and the Republicans.
Right.
I'm really, really upset about that. And if I remember correctly, we had Mark White, we had Charlie Baum, we had Scott Sapicki voted against it, John Reagan voted against it, and there's one more, and I can't think of who that is.
Well, I think there was one that didn't vote. There was 1 or 2 that did not vote.
We had 2 people that weren't there. And so, had they been there, if Brian Ritchie had been there, he said he would have voted for it, and why he wasn't there, I don't know.
Right.
But that was a committee member that wasn't there, and then Kurt Haston wasn't there because he had been excused. He had a child that was sick that day.
Right.
But across the board, what I would think is that your Republicans would vote with a Republican in the committee for the simple fact that they knew it wasn't going anywhere in the Senate.
Right. It was already tabled in the Senate.
If they had a problem with the bill, instead of trying to amend it somewhat, or all they had to do was vote for it, knowing that it wasn't going to move forward in the Senate, and what they would have done is showed support for their fellow Republican, and it would not have given Justin Jones and his group that win. And I'm still very upset about that. I haven't talked to every one of them yet about their reasoning for it. I know the reasoning for a couple, and I'm very unhappy with that. And I've had a conversation with the speaker about, number one, the chairman of that committee did a terrible job.
He lost control. He lost control from get-go. Never had it.
Yeah. And so that to me was the worst issue that we've had in committee so far. And in truth and clarity, Chris Todd is my representative, but also in truth and clarity, I didn't have anything to do with writing that bill. So anybody can't say that was a TFA sponsored bill. We didn't write it. We didn't have anything to do with it. Was Richard Archie in favor of that? Absolutely.
Right.
Because I can promise you that, like in Texas, where they allow people who have got their permits to carry in the schools, we would be far better off to allow people who've got them here to carry in those schools, because then the people who intend harm would know that there's a chance I'm going to get short-stopped with what I want to do. I want to make a name for myself by killing all these children and maybe some teachers and stuff. But if they think, and look back at this, we know this for a fact. We haven't been able to see the manifesto from this shooter.
Right.
I was really surprised in Florida, this last thing that happened down there. The manifesto from this gentleman that killed these 3 people was published within, 3 hours?
Yep. Well, it fit the narrative, so they wanted to show that one. I'm convinced that the Covenant Manifesto, in addition to, I'm sure, having a lot of my guess is it has a lot of anti-Christian rhetoric in it, but I think there's something going on in Covenant. I think there is something deeper that they don't want exposed. Because remember, the person that did the shooting was a student there earlier. So I've just, I can't prove anything, but I have a lot of suspicions that that's why we haven't seen it, or at least part of why we haven't seen it. One other thing, on the bill that was killed, now, I think you mentioned this, I don't think you mentioned a name, and I'll leave that up to you whether or not you want to, but one of those Republicans had told Representative Todd that he was going to support the bill and then voted against it, correct?
Yeah, it's my understanding that Scott Sapicki actually had said he was going to vote for it, and then in the end, whether it was his own impassioned speech that he made against the bill or somebody talked to him and he thought better of it, then he changed his mind, and that's what wound up with the 9-9 tie that killed the bill. Now, the Speaker of the House or the Speaker pro tem could have come into that committee and voted to break the tie, but they didn't do it.
And who's the
and
Speaker
I
pro
have seen
tem?
the Speaker of the House come in and break a tie in a committee before, but evidently there's just so much stuff happening in the special session that people can't keep up with everything in every committee in every place, and hence the reason that it's not a good idea to have the special session where everything is crammed so quickly. Yeah. And so I'm very unhappy with the way that turned out. It just doesn't show good camaraderie amongst our. So one thing you can guarantee about the Democrats, they're gonna support each other every time. Yeah. They vote and dance in lockstep, and they never swerve a jot from it. And we can't show solidarity at all. And I think we've got a super majority. It looks like we can do anything we wanted to, right?
You would
we
think.
Haven't really shown that.
We have a souped up majority, not a super majority.
Well, that would be one way of describing it. Yes, I think you're correct.
That's a clean version.
Yeah.
But so they didn't really accomplish any. Well, so far I say they haven't. We know that they've agreed to take up. The Senate has agreed to take up 7 more House bills. Now,
what they did today in their floor session was they went through a first reading on that and agreed to either send them to the appropriate committee or to let them lay on the desk. If they just let them lay on the desk and they don't pick them up and move them to the committee, then they die right there as well. They were tabled originally, but they decided to run them through in first consideration today so that they could then be moved, I guess, to the proper committee. They could have another reading on those. But what the Senate, and I've done as much talking to them as I can, what they've said all along is we told the House and the governor what we were going to do. The governor brought forth specific things that he wanted to deal with in relation to the Covenant shooting, and we have addressed those. Now, where they got this other bill that deals with child trafficking, I don't know. To me, that doesn't fit the call of the session whatsoever. Right. But yet somehow that got up and got passed instantly in the Senate. So I don't know where that came from. Not that it's not a good idea, don't get me wrong, but here's the thing that I'm really tripped about this. In every one of these things that they talk about, they want a TBI to do a report. Have you seen who gets to see the report? The speakers of both houses and the governor.
Right. Nobody else.
They don't put it up. Yeah, they don't put it up for you and I to see, even though we're paying for it. Because I promise you, those guys at the TBI that are doing the research on this are not volunteering their time. They're on the taxpayer's dime for that. But why, in a state that Thomas Jefferson said had the least imperfect and the most Republican of all the constitutions that he had seen, and what it says in Article 1, Section 1, that all power is inherent in the people and all free governments are founded on their authority and instituted for their peace, safety, and happiness. If those things are true, if they intend to follow their oath that they take every time that they raise their hand at the start of session to vote without favor, affection, partiality, or prejudice, why aren't they allowing the people to have something to do with this? Why are they keeping that information from the people? Why does it go to certain members of the legislature first? I don't understand that, and I don't think that that's right, nor do I think it's constitutional by any stretch of the imagination.
Well, our state has a history of ignoring the Constitution from early on. As you well know, in the Bruin case, they cited the fact that Tennessee, the patron state of shooting stuff, basically has been restricting our rights to keep and bear arms, or certainly to bear and carry arms, pretty much since the ink dried. And that was pointed out.
If you do an exhaustive search of the laws that have been passed which make it a crime to carry a firearm in Tennessee, like I have, you understand that we ratified our Constitution in 1796. And in 1801, the General Assembly of Tennessee passed a law saying it's a crime for you to carry a firearm. Why would you debase yourself to carry a firearm? Well, when we were getting ready to go down into Alabama to fight the Red Sticks, Colonel Jackson asked for all these rednecks to bring their firearms to the Capitol and go with him and fight the Red Sticks, the Creeks down in Alabama, and then turned around and went over to New Orleans and fought them there. But even before then, if you look back at the very founding of this nation, the Over Mountain Men and John Sevier and William Carroll and Campbell, those guys were not soldiers. They were just simply volunteers, and they got their guys together and marched over the mountain and went and fought Ferguson and shot him and won freedom and liberty. I mean, George Washington said if it hadn't been for those wild men from the frontier, we would not have survived the Revolutionary War. And in all those instances, what happened as soon as those soldiers, not soldiers, but those volunteers got done, they simply went home because they were just men who wanted to be left alone. They weren't going and looking for trouble. They didn't hunt up the British. But what they didn't do was stand there and let them take our stuff from us. And so what you have to understand, those individuals that lived through that period made sure that that right that pre-existed the foundation of this nation was vouchsafed and put on a piece of paper so that it was enumerated. We knew that it was there. And it took the Bill of Rights being written and put out before the colonies would ratify the Constitution. And so therefore, if you don't understand how important that is now, you're never going to understand it, because you look at what's going on in the United States right now, and you have to understand they're doing their best to bleed the Constitution dry. And for us to understand the responsibility of the citizen, you need to know that it is absolutely necessary that we keep firearms in our possession. It is our birthright of every American. And for three different things, just like Scalia said in Heller, you get to use that in self-defense of three different postulations. In a criminal aspect, either in your home or outside your home. In case of invasion, and brother, I promise you, we're being invaded right now. If you don't see what's happening from the southern border, and quite frankly, from the northern border as well, we're letting them in both ends of it.
Yep.
And then the third thing he talked about was just in case you need to withstand a tyrannical government. And those are the reasons that we have that pre-existing right that is God-given, and government can only do one thing, and that is to harm it or to infringe it. And in the McDonald case in 2010, they incorporated the Second Amendment against the states through the due process clause of the 14th Amendment, which means that the states are now held under the same set of chains to not infringe that right that the federal government is. And yet we have to keep reminding them every day. It's still a crime in the state of Tennessee for any individual who's not a post-certified law enforcement officer to carry a loaded firearm. And that's 3917-1307A1. And it says that it's an offense to carry a loaded firearm or a club with the intent to go armed. Now, what fool picks up a gun and puts it on his hip and doesn't intend to go armed? That's the most ludicrous bunch of word salad that I've ever heard. But yeah, it has survived since 1870, when the Democrats, who were in charge of state government at that time, wanted to be sure that the freed slaves didn't have an ability to carry firearms to protect themselves. And so they put that codicil in our Constitution and put it in our statutory laws that said you can't carry a firearm, and they used to say, a knife with a blade of over 4 inches or a club with the intent to go armed. It's a crime to do so. Now, your enhanced carry permit is a defense against prosecution. The concealed carry permit is an exception, and the governor's constitutional carry, so-called, is an exemption. So you've got defenses, exemptions, and exceptions, but you don't have a right in Tennessee to carry a firearm. And by the way, the one thing that really miffs me is that 42 other states in this union allow their citizens to carry a long gun without a permit, loaded on their person as they walk about. Tennessee is one of only 4 states in the union that still call that a crime. New York, New Jersey, Florida, and Tennessee are those 4 states which deem it a crime for their citizens to bear arms, which the Second Amendment says is your right. So I'm confused about how our state can continue to do that.
Well, you know, it's funny in the past, and I'm not somebody that thinks, I have kind of a minority view on this, that we shouldn't just bow down to to anything that the Supreme Court says. But generally speaking, that's what states do. And they believe that the Supreme Court is the final word on anything constitutional, even if it's obviously blatantly unconstitutional, like the marriage decision. But guess
Or
what? Our state,
even worse. I'll give you one worse than that, Dave.
Yeah.
How about Roe v. Wade?
Yeah, absolutely. But all the states folded. There was no question. They in our state on the marriage issue folded in about an hour.
Yeah.
And they made everything comport, even though the governor didn't have the authority to do that. He should have been impeached for doing that, but all the same. But the same standard doesn't apply when it comes to the Second Amendment, because all this administration has done ever since Bruen and before is drag their feet and fight and do everything they can to prevent our state from being compliant with the Supreme Court decision. And they don't do that on anything else. On anything else, they say, well, the court's spoken, so we have to comply, but not on this.
And what they'll say is, well, the court's spoken, and we're afraid we'll be sued if we do anything differently. That was the same thing on the marriage. Oh, no, we've got to capitulate for that because somebody will sue us. Yeah. You don't hear them saying anything about when we raise the issue of being able to carry a long gun as a right in Tennessee. No, you get the director of the TBI to come to the General Assembly and testify in committee in front of cameras, while the Second Amendment only protects your right to carry a musket. That type of thing. And so those are people that we pay. They're supposed to be the most learned individuals that we have. But I hazard, and the man sat there and told us that he'd done an exhaustive reading of Heller and Bruen. And I'm sorry, but the Bruen decision simply puts forth a test that says if it wasn't a law that was on the books at the time of the founding, it doesn't exist. It cannot be used for scrutiny with respect to the Second Amendment if it wasn't on the books at the time of the ratification, because the Constitution was written in such a manner that the people who ratified it could understand it, or they would not have ratified it.
Right.
I mean, it was a hard road to hoe to get the colonies, or the various states at that point, to ratify the Constitution. They had to put this Bill of Rights together to do it. And so the people understood. They had just got through having to throw a tyrannical government off of their shores. And it cost a lot of them their lives and their property. And they swore that they pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. And a lot of them died on the field of battle to make sure that they had left us an opportunity for liberty. How do you think they would feel today looking at what we've got as the laws across the United States when, it's okay to just break in stores and steal everything while people stand around and the police don't prosecute them? You would think that what they talked about was, you had a right to protect your life and your property. You can't protect your property now. You have to give that up. If somebody wants to come and take it, you have to watch them go down your driveway with it, because our state legislature does not think that you have the right to protect your property. It's okay if they take it. It's all right. And I don't get that.
No. And I think a lot of people probably don't know that last one there. They probably assume here in Tennessee that if somebody is trying to steal your property, especially when they're on you, like let's say they're trying to steal your vehicle or something, most people would probably think, well, I can shoot that person. No, you can't.
Nope.
Not unless that person is posing a direct threat to you. If you feel like your life's in danger, you can't just shoot somebody to save your property in Tennessee.
Well, even if you run out there and try to grab the keys away from them and they're trying to get away from you, you still can't stop them. You can't use the threat of deadly force to stop that. Unless they turn around and you actually can convince law enforcement that you were in fear of severe bodily injury or death, you cannot use deadly force to protect yourself. You can't even use the threat of it. If you walk out your front door and somebody's taking your car and you point a gun at them, you're the criminal. And that's not right, but that's the way it is.
Yeah. And it's just hard to believe that it's actually that way in Tennessee. I know that we've tried to get that law fixed in the past, and hopefully we will this upcoming session. With these other bills, now I think as far as the good that we know of so far, I mean, like I said, I'm not going to breathe easy until they gavel this thing out. But at least earlier today, there had been nothing that would resemble any kind of red flag law at this point, correct?
That's correct. Now, what they did in the Senate They simply laid that stuff on the table because they had Senate Democrats who filed the same type of bills that they did in the House. And they had, 12, 15 of them that were exactly the same thing, just had little subtle nuances differently. But none of those got actually killed in the Senate. They didn't get taken up. They didn't get passed. But they're not dead there. I will have to give credit to the House that the House actually killed them. They took them off notice. They got them buried. Now, I guess you could do a recall motion for it, but I don't think there's any stomach in the House to do that. So I feel much better protected from the aspect of a red flag law by our House than I do our Senate right now. Now, the Senate's tact on this thing is we're just not going to bring it up more. We're not going to talk about it. And so what they're saying is that they're actually doing more of what the governor called, because they've only passed these 3 bills, even though one of them wasn't anywhere in the call, and should have waited until regular session. But between the 2 houses, we don't have anything sitting in committee right now to go that would make me fear a red flag or ERPO law. And that, I think, is a win for the conservatives and actually for every citizen in the state. People don't understand how this red flag stuff works. In fact, I just saw the other day they were talking about an individual in one of the states who had tried to beat a person in a political race, and so they couldn't do that, and they turned around and turned him in through the red flag thing and said, oh, I heard he was doing this or that. And then they've actually arrested her for doing this. Was a city councilman or something like that. I need to get I want to do a YouTube video on that one, because that is the exact thing that we're talking about can happen with the red flag law.
Absolutely.
We've had one person killed where they came in to get his guns and they just shot him because he wasn't willing to give them up. Instead of, calling and saying, hey, look, we want you to turn your stuff in. And we know what they do is they use this Gestapo-like tactic where they just go ahead and kick your doors in. Now, did you see this thing that happened in Chester County the other night?
No.
Where the FBI came in and there was evidently a disgruntled veteran, a disabled disgruntled veteran. And so they started lobbing tear gas through his windows. And when his wife was trying to get away from tear gas and the flashbangs and stuff, they grabbed her and jerked her and threw her in the car. And when he stood at the door, they shot and killed him.
In Chester County?
Yeah, in Chester County, Tennessee. And this has been within the last 3 or 4 days. We hadn't seen much on the news about that.
No, we haven't. And it's wrong to come into somebody's house that way. And this happens a lot. And guess what? A lot of times they go to the wrong house. I mean, that's happened before too, all across the country. So this red flag stuff is just flat out dangerous, totally unconstitutional. And it's really irritating to me, not only that the governor called it and that it wasn't gavelled right out when the legislature got together, but that instead of, for once our Senate, and I'm not a fan of our Senate overall, but they're probably doing closer to what more of the people want in this instance than the House, because they're just passing a few bills that are really of no concern when it comes to the Second Amendment and trying to go home. But the House, they just want to seem to keep this show going, and I don't understand that.
I've talked to a couple of people who say, what we want to do is take advantage of this time to make the liberals feel bad. We want to pass stuff to make the liberals feel bad. And I'm going, why don't we just not do anything and get out of there and then gird our loins and get prepared for regular session? Then we can make them do whatever.
Yeah.
Right now, you have this disconnect between the House and the Senate. And in Republicans across the board, we're supposed to have the supermajority, like we said. And we look like Ned in the first reader. We're not, I don't know who's calling the plays for everybody there, but it appears to me that we got 2 generals and we don't know where the fronts are. And so therefore what we do is wind up in the circular firing squad, and we liable to do damage to ourselves. I mean, we've already seen that the liberals are winning the war of the press right now, because every day that you're there, you're giving an opportunity. In this mess today that went on in the House floor session, Every Democrat walked out, and they went outside and got in front of the chamber's door with all the people that were up there screaming, "This is our house," or "the people's house," or what. You couldn't tell what it was. It just noise. It just noise going on.
Right.
And so you looked up and you had Justin Jones and Justin Pearson out there, and they were raising their hand. They were goading that group on. And so doing that, you've got all the media out there taking video of that. And I can promise you across the board tonight on the TV news, CNN, and NPR, and all these different places,
That's all you're
they're
going to
going to
see.
be there, and it's going to make Tennessee look terrible.
Yeah,
Now,
almost as bad
the
as
other day-
McNally made us look a few months ago.
Yeah, well, I think worse, actually, because that was just one person doing that.
Right.
And this is what they're doing is they're hanging the whole state with this. Every Republican in the state is being smacked with this right now. Now, you know who the Tennessee Holler is.
Oh, yeah.
They're a group that runs up and down the halls, and they use a cell phone, and they take videos, and they try to argue their way into making you make a mistake. That got me the other day, and they started all this same stuff. Guns are terrible. Guns are bad. Guns kill people. The only thing bad is guns, guns, guns. And so I started talking about the Constitution, going, I don't think you understand. You haven't done your homework. Have you read the Heller decision? Have you read McDonald? Have you read Bruin? Do you know? And then he tried to hit me. Well, Article 1, Section 26 of the Tennessee Constitution says that the legislature has the power to, not regulate. I think that wasn't the word he used, which is what is actually there, but to restrict arms, what it says. And I tried to explain to him, and he didn't like it. I said, what the article says is the people of this state have a right to keep and bear arms for their common defense. However, the legislature shall have power by law to regulate the wearing of arms with a view to prevent crime. Now, if you go back to the Andrews v. State case, which was a Supreme Court case that came about in 1870, right after we had rejoined the Union, and that clause of the Constitution had been changed from what it originally said was the free people of this state have the right to keep and bear arms for their common defense, period. There wasn't nothing about the legislature has any power to do anything. That was made up out of whole cloth in 1870 as a Jim Crow law to make sure that freed slaves didn't have an opportunity to carry arms to defend themselves against the KKK and the Night Riders. That's a fact. Everybody knows it, but nobody wants to say it out loud at the legislature, either side, Democrats or Republicans. But the whole point of it is they said that you have a right to carry your firearm in Tennessee to and from your home, and the legislature could not hold you as a criminal to do it as long as you use it for ordinary and usual practices, that you have a right to keep it, to bear it, and to keep it in a state of efficiency for use and to provide ammunition for it. And if, in fact, it has to be any law passed, they've got to prove that it has some direct effect on reducing crime, or else is it unconstitutional. And so I said, what you've got to do is bring to the table empirical data that shows what you're attempting to do is going to reduce crime. And I've never seen anybody bring anything to any committee meeting that says, hey, we have proved that if you allow these guys to have 38 caliber handguns, 20 more people are going to die, and here's the empirical data for that. And that's what our Constitution and our Supreme Court require. That is the metric by which it must be judged if you're going to pass that law. But our General Assembly hadn't paid any attention to that whatsoever, and they still don't. In the Bruin case, the Solicitor General for the District of Columbia came forth and he said, Your Honors, you need to understand that in Tennessee, in 1821, they passed a law making it illegal for any person to carry a firearm. That law is still on their books. If the patron state of shooting stuff can do that, why can't New York? I mean, and that's a valid argument. And they talked about Texas, and it was the same way. I was out in Texas when we first got the handgun carry permit in 94. And that was after the Killeen shooting down there, the Luby's massacre.
Yeah.
And a young lady ran for state house for the full intent. She had lost her mother and father in that debacle. And at that point in Texas, you could not bring your firearm into a brick and mortar store. You could have it in your car and you could travel with it, kind of like you got in Tennessee with the long gun right now.
Right.
You can your AR-15 loaded in your car, and you've been able to since 2014, but you can't get out and walk around with it.
Right.
Now, that doesn't make any sense to me. If you're going to allow them to carry them from point A to point B, they got it if they need it, don't they? Or if they want it. And so that's the law. And when we were looking at the bill that Rusty Grills carried, 1005, that would have allowed that, they asked the Department of Safety's director or commissioner, excuse me, you know, isn't it legal right now for people to carry loaded long guns in their cars? And isn't that where you patrol, is on the highways? And don't your officers confront people with loaded long guns in their cars all the time? He didn't know.
He didn't know?
Couldn't answer that question. Yeah, right, like he doesn't know. So the whole point is they don't like people having guns. They just don't. And they're going to do everything that they can. Instead of being, what they do is they work for the governor. And you have to understand that what they're supposed to do is faithfully enforce the law. If you look at Article 3 of our Constitution of Tennessee, it tells you what the powers are that we have for the governor. He's supposed to faithfully enforce laws, and the people that work underneath him are supposed to do that same thing. They are not supposed to make law.
Yep, and he has apparently has not gotten that message, and our legislature has just facilitated his misunderstanding, or I think it's really just ignoring what his role is supposed to be. And it really irritates me to no end that they cater, not just this legislature, not just this governor, but in general. They cater to him, and they forget that they represent us, not him.
That's correct. And again, you have to understand that we have a division of powers that we have delegated. The whole point that I try to get people to understand about the Constitution, it is simply a contract amongst the people, okay? And in that, what it results in is a set of written hiring practices for the servants that we need to do the business of government.
Yep.
We say how old they can be, where they must live, and we say what their delegated powers are. And they're not supposed to step outside those bounds. The legislature is supposed to make law.
Yep.
Now, does that mean that they're going to make constitutional law? Absolutely not. And so then what you've got is the governor sitting there on the other side and the administrative. So after they put it together and decide to vote for it, he can veto it or pass it. That's his power right there.
Right.
That's where he gets to say something on legislation, is by either voting or signing it or vetoing it. Now, the state of Tennessee is one of those few states that said, guess what? We don't want to give that much power to one person. And so, therefore, all it takes is a plurality. The same number of people that passed that bill in the first place can override a governor's veto. 50% plus one. Now, once you've got an unconstitutional bill run by the legislature, and then the governor signed an unconstitutional bill, what you've got is the Supreme Court then that gets to be the final arbiter of it. That's the way government is designed, checks and balances across the board. But what we've got now is you have a governor that decides what we've got for a budget, and you've got a governor that decides what we can have for laws. And it's upside down and it's backwards. It's not the way it's supposed to be, and it's not the way the contract was written. And it's time that the people of Tennessee demanded to be a part of this equation, because they are, in fact, like I said, Article 1, Section 1, all power is supposed to be inherent in the people.
Absolutely. We do have a question from a viewer.
Okay.
In reference to Chris Todd's bill that lost because it was a 9-9 tie. What was the bill number on that?
It was 7064, House Bill 7064.
Okay.
And what it did was it said retired police officers, retired military, and people with enhanced carry permits could carry firearms in school. Now, and again, like I said, what we've said all along is we let people with enhanced carry permits walk amongst us with guns all the time. Our legislature said that's fine. Our Department of Safety is the one that put the rules together and the training, and the one that issued the permits.
Yeah. Well, you know, and schools are not safe places anymore. They've been killing zones since at least Columbine, so I don't understand why, you know, even in addition to maybe preventing fewer kids from getting killed, you know, the teachers that work there, the staff that works there, why is it they lose their constitutional right to defend themselves just because they're in a school?
They should not. And, you know, you go back and you do a deep dive and look at sensitive places, because what they said in the Bruin decision, they quoted Scalia and Heller saying, you know, we've got to admit now there's some places where you don't need to carry guns. Some, you know, In courtrooms, that's a bad place. And then they said schools, which I don't think he thought about that. But when you go back and you look at the first gun control law that had to do with schools, was Thomas Jefferson talking about one of the colleges that he sat on the board of. And he said, what we've got is these kids that are actually going to school are drinking too much, and so we don't need to let them have guns in their classroom or in their dorms. But what we can do is we're not going to take away the right of the people who are actually paying the bills. The teachers and the staff and the folks that show up, the parents, can still carry their arms. Nobody talks about that.
Right.
It's just, oh, it's a terrible thing to have guns in schools. No, it's not. You got soft spots in your head if you don't understand that it's going to be absolutely necessary to have armed people inside schools if you want your children to be safe. If you don't get that, you need to stop and think about it, because it's a fact. It's irrefutable.
And as bad as things are, they're probably going to get worse. We have no idea who's coming across our border that might just decide, you know what, I don't like these Americans anyway. They actually come, maybe that person came over here to do something. And our borders are wide open. We don't know who's over here. So I think I want as many people, as many adults in those schools as possible to have a gun. And I think it's ridiculous that SROs are the only ones that have them.
Well, and you look at what Nashville has done. Let's think about this for a minute. Nashville turned the money back to the state and said, we can't hire the SROs, so we're not going to take the money because we'd have to use it if we did. And so therefore, they're not guaranteeing that they're going to put an SRO in every school in Davidson County, for the simple fact that they can't hire enough officers to do it. I know for a fact, I've asked the question here in Madison County, where I live, that we're about 40% of what we need to be in post-certified police officers on the force right now. And characteristically, in times past, when we had a full contingent of them, it was about one post-certified police officer to every 7,500 people at any one time during the day. Now think about that, 7,500 people to one post-certified police officer. What do you think the chances are that he can be standing next to you when a crime occurs?
Right, absolutely.
That's the reason they have qualified immunity, which means you can't sue them if they can't protect you, because there's no way they can protect you. There's no way that they can be everywhere We used to joke and say this when we were trying to get handgun carry permits passed in Tennessee. It's a whole lot easier to carry a handgun than it is a cop. They weigh too much, and there's not enough of them. You can't get enough cops for everybody to carry a cop every day. And it's, we laugh about that, but it's true, because unless you have somebody, what is the old saying? We sleep in our beds at night because rough men stand ready in the dark to visit violence on them that would do us harm. Somebody has got to be ready to visit violence on those who intend to do us harm, because that's the only thing that they understand. They're criminals. They're not playing fair. The simple fact that they intend to do you harm means that they don't care what the law is. And you can pass 500 laws, and it's not going to make one whit of difference at all.
So for the session so far, we would say the good is that they haven't passed anything at this point, and you don't think there's the possibility, although never say never, of them passing something that is or even close to a red flag law. The bad is that the Democrats have, I guess in a lot of ways, exploited the divide between our House and Senate. And oh, by the way, within our House, we have people stabbing some of our own people in the back when it comes to votes. And our chairman, oh, by the way, I saw not only Mark White, but I was in the committee earlier that same day that Andrew Farmer was running. He had no control either. So that makes us look bad when the left is able to basically take over a committee meeting. So that's the bad.
Well,
what would you say is the ugliest thing about this session so far, assuming something doesn't come out really bad before this is all over?
The ugliest thing that has occurred from this is the win that we have given the left with media, because we have offered them so many opportunities to point at us and say, look, they can't get their act together. And yet what they do time after time after time is they say, these people don't care anything about children. They only care about guns. And of course, that's not so. It's not true. But we've allowed them to take the metric over. We've allowed them to have the talking points every day. We've allowed them the microphone because we didn't go in, do our business, and go home. And so the longer we're sitting there, the more opportunity they have to get more photo opportunities and more video that they can use in fundraising down the road and to make us look bad across the board. I mean, you know that they're shipping this stuff right to Washington for Biden to look at.
Oh, yeah.
I'm embarrassed, I'm ashamed, and I'm aggravated that we're not smart enough to play this game so that we win. Instead of being on the back of our heels and letting them take the day, we've given them the opportunity to make us look bad across the board.
So what do you think will be the final result legislative-wise for the special session, considering that the Senate has now agreed to take up some bills?
Well, I heard someone say in the House floor session this afternoon, that group over there is just not doing their job. We're having to do the hard work. Every time they say that, they aggravate the Senate a little more. I mean, here was the deal. When the ostrich egg award was given to the Senate, I can promise you across the board that ticked every one of them off, even the ones that might have been willing to talk about some of this other stuff. They got entrenched and said, no, you can't insult us like that.
Yeah, you're going to have to explain that so that people understand what the ostrich award was. Award.
We had the caucus chair,
Jeremy Faison. Pants Faison, right?
An ostrich egg in a little urn sitting on what appeared to be the dais of the Senate. And he said, they got, I'm going to give them the ostrich egg award because they got their head in their sand. They're not doing anything. There's 33 people over there that hold everything that you want to do right there in the palm of their hand. And if they clench their fists and say, not today, Bubba, it just doesn't make any sense. If you got a hornet's nest in your garage, probably not going to be the best idea to go in there and thump that thing in the middle of the day. And so what you don't do is you don't take a picture and tell them that they're worthless, they're not doing their job and all that, and then put it on social media. I'm amazed that he did that. And I watched an interview that Paul Bailey did with one of the Nashville TV stations. He said, well, that's just something that characteristically Jeremy Faison does. And so if that's the way the Senate views that, how do you climb over the top of that if they've already got their feelings hurt? If you've already aggravated them, what do you have to do to get them then to assent to work with you? It just doesn't make any sense to me to aggravate someone who's on your team.
Yeah. Well, it's not really surprising to me that Faison would do that. I mean, he's probably the only representative in any state legislature that attempted to pull the pants down of a referee during a high school basketball game. And of course, we know he's one of those guys who tried to who recruited Eddie Manis, a known homosexual Democrat, to run against a Republican a couple of years ago. By the way, an anti-Trump Democrat. So I think Faison needs to be phased out personally as far as leadership goes. But we'll see how all that turns out.
The whole thing, every bit of it right now, makes us, and I consider myself a Republican. I have worked for the Republican Party for years and years and years. That's a separate aside from what I do with TFA. Right. Because strictly TFA is a Second Amendment protagonist group that's non-partisan, committal. I mean, we don't say Democrat or Republican. We can't because of the rules that go along with what we do. Right. But across the board, personally, Richard Archie has been a member of the Republican Party forever, and I'm just ashamed right now of what I'm seeing. We're losing the battle in the TV so bad that it's ludicrous. And again, like I said, I'm embarrassed.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of us are embarrassed, frustrated, disgusted. Here we have a so-called Republican governor calling a red flag session, a red flag special session. Of course, that's kind of par for the course for Governor Lee as well. I don't think there's a governor in this country that during his campaign in 2018 talked about Jesus as much, and as soon as he got in office, he was a Judas to conservatives in this state. So we can't get stuck with him again, but we've got him for another 3 years. So I really hope that our legislature gets their act together and soon.
Billy told us he sent a letter to the TFA in 2018, and he made this list of promises. He wanted to see teachers be able to carry their arms in schools, the ones that were lawful to do so. He wanted them to be a part of the school safety situation. He did not want to see our youth being used to make points against the Second Amendment. He wanted to be sure that any person that had a permit to carry could carry on any college campus. He wanted to be sure that we had real constitutional carry. And of all those promises that he made at that point, none of them have come to fruition. And so, therefore, my question is, did he mean that, or was he simply electioneering at that point?
My money goes on electioneering.
I would have to say, after being able to watch what I've seen as of late, especially, I mean, I've got him on tape at one of the first TFA meetings up in Springfield when he said, well, I don't believe in constitutional carry.
Yep.
You know, I've got friends in law enforcement, and they're not for that. And so, therefore, I trust my friends in law enforcement. I guess his best friend in law enforcement at that point was Jeff Long, the sheriff of his county, who wound up being, oh, that's right, the commissioner of the Department of Safety. And so if that person wasn't for constitutional carry and wasn't for your ability to carry a firearm to protect yourself, and we heard him in testimony this year, he said, no, you know, these people carrying these rifles and this stuff, you know, I'm just not all for that. Since 2014, his officers have had to deal with that, and it hasn't been a problem. There's not been one single reported case that I can find where a lawful gun owner with a loaded long gun in their vehicle caused a problem in Tennessee. And yet, he was, no, we can't do that. No, we just can't. And he talked about all that mess that happened at Radnor Lake years before. In the first place, what they did was they held that idiot that was over there trying to do that, and I'll have to call him that because he was, but he didn't violate any laws. And law enforcement at that time didn't know enough about it to know that he wasn't violating the law. And so, yeah, it scared some people, but maybe what we need to do is to educate people as to what the laws actually are. And if we did that, I know Brandon Ogles has for years attempted to get a bill passed through the House over there that would mandate that we teach gun safety in school. Have never been able to get it passed. I think it would be an excellent idea because across the board, every child at some point in their life is going to come across a firearm in one way or another. Why don't we teach them how to safely manage that? Yep. You know, first thing you do is don't touch it. Number two is leave that area and go find an adult. But if you don't tell them, they won't know that. Absolutely. They may think that it's okay to pick it up and play with it if we don't teach them any different. Yep. But we can't get our Tennessee legislators to allow us to teach that simple thing in class, in school, in Tennessee.
Yeah. Well, Richard, thank you for being with us. Is there anything any closing thoughts you want to leave the audience with?
You know, here's the thing. It is absolutely necessary that we invest ourselves with knowledge and that we talk to our representatives and our senators. If you don't have your representative and senator cell phone number, you're failing in your fiduciary responsibility to your state. It is absolutely necessary that they hear from you because you are required under Article 1, Section 23 to instruct your representatives. Pericles said this in ancient Greece. Just because you don't take an interest in politics does not mean that politics will not take an interest in you. You have to understand that when we founded this nation, when we threw off the yoke of tyranny from the British government at that point, that the conversations that were had took place in two places, churches and bars. And what we've got to start doing is talking to each other instead of at each other. We need to start discussing these things and then going to our representatives and saying, hey, do you understand what the Constitution actually calls for? We're tired of you violating your oath to not assent to anything, law, vote, resolution, whatever, which would appear injurious to the people's ability to enjoy the rights and privileges enumerated in the Constitution. They put numbers on them so that we would know that they were ours forever. Scalia said in Heller that we wrote the Constitution for the ages. It is not some old dusty document that we don't have to pay attention to anymore. And so, just like they said in Bruin, you've got to go back to the original text in history because the Constitution was ratified by the people. They understood what it was, and that's what they want it to always mean. Yeah. So that's my final deal. Educate yourself and talk to your representatives.
Well, it's certainly not just the rich men north of Richmond we have to worry about. We have to worry about those rich men legislators in Nashville as well. Hey, Richard, thanks for being on. Appreciate all the information. Great to have you. I'll certainly have you back sometime. Thank everybody for watching. If you enjoyed the program, please hit the like button and subscribe. Our guest next week will be Tom DeWeese, chairman of the American Policy Center, to talk about how to protect your property and other rights from the radical environmental groups that have taken over our government. Hope you will join us. Good night. Thanks for watching.